with the leather in his shoes. Dalton stood chewing on another Condition 1 bar after an excruciating back workout, listening to a business podcast in the bedroom. Ava was rushing into the hospital with all of her date-night needs packed in the car. Her morning went askew and she attempted to drop off Xena at the doggy daycare, and they alerted her to an outbreak of fleas from one of the dogs, and they'd be closed to bomb. She called in a favor with Huma, who was all too glad to help her girlfriend out on her big date day. The payment came in the form of listening to her go on as long as she possibly could, pressing her to make it to work on time. All of that, and Ava left the house with her hair still wet. Dalton had the Alfa Romeo detailed by his buddy Cliff, who knew cars. Cliff was the car guy Dalton liked to think he could be, and he always did a superb job with all the nooks and crannies. Dalton walked out of the condo looking ready for a red carpet night at approximately 4:30. A bouquet of flowers was waiting in the passenger seat as he had Cliff pick them up on his way down Carey Street. He couldn't have picked out a more pleasant arrangement himself. It was the precise moment that Dalton pulled into the parking garage that Ava was reminded she should be leaving and decided to pull away from work and actually get changed. She had gotten situated in her dress when her phone lit up with a message from one of her nurses. There was a delivery that required her level of authority or higher to sign for it. Once she realized the order included new connector cords for the vitals machines in her section, she got wrapped up with the proper collection and disposal of the old ones. Before she knew it, the time was 16:50. She tiptoed to the staff locker room and touched up the mascara and secured the straps halfway up her calves. Ava made her way out from the recesses of the hospital to find Dalton looking as dapper as she'd ever imagined. The flowers lay across his lap as he tended to business on his iPhone with a half-empty Diet Dr. Pepper from the vending machine by his left foot. Her perfume reached his senses before her beauty made its way into his field of vision, and when he looked up, his expression told her everything she needed to know. She didn't look silly, and he was happy to see her, despite the delay. He stood to greet her with his mouth open much wider than he was aware. The flowers he held awkwardly were extended to her at half speed. "I'm so sorry I'm late. It was one thing after another." She embraced him with the tiniest kiss on his left cheek. His visible state of being taken aback with the sight of her in a dress and heels was beginning to make her cheeks flush with blood. "We aren't going to be too late, are we?" "Nothing happens without you, Ava. You look... wow. Those are for you." "Yes, they're lovely." She smelled them, hiding her face behind the blooms. "Not here, Dalton. I don't want to embarrass the staff." Several nurses and cleaning crew had congregated near the reception station to see the version of Ava they never knew existed, engaging her handsome celebrity beau. The two stood, visually snacking on one another, before a nurse whispered into Ava's ear that they were about to receive a house fire victim, and they should probably head out before it all got congested, that EMS was moments away. Ava's ears perked up as she listened intently. Dalton paused, looking in the same direction as her eyes darted, staring. Not 5 seconds later, and Dalton understood what they were listening for. The splash of red began flashing against every reflective surface around them. His eyes squinted with the sharp blasts of color ceaselessly drenching everything around them. Ava moved toward the crew, unloading the patient from the ambulance, as if she was under mind control. One EMT shouted to a nurse rushing past them that IV access had been established and that they were pushing a second bag of fluid on a 9-year-old African-American girl, with up to third-degree burns covering over 75% of her body. Upon hearing that, Ava shouted, No! Don't you put that in her. She needs blood products now. No more fluid. Come on, go." The bouquet of flowers were pushed into Dalton's chest as Ava ran to the side of the young girl to visually inspect her. Dalton tried to get close to her, to tell her that she was all right, that they should go, when he caught a whiff of the charred flesh that stopped him in his tracks. The back of his hand, still clutching the bouquet, was what he used to close off his nostrils from the stench. He watched Ava disappear around the corner, untying the straps of her cork wedges, to go be Captain Stenberg. Unsure just what had taken place, he returned to his seat, still processing the disfigured girl. who would never be the same, even if she were to survive. He was searching for a small bill in his wallet when he heard the commotion of a hysterical family that he could only assume was the close family of the girl that had been wheeled into the ER. Dalton couldn't determine if one man was the father or uncle, if the woman with him were aunts, mothers, or neighbors. One was clearly a grandmother and looked to be due for a visit to the hospital soon herself. The lot were inconsolable and appeared to be in financial straits. 4 bottles of water were purchased by Dalton and served as an attempted icebreaker to extend comfort to these tortured individuals. The gratitude was conveyed through the membrane and distress. He began sharing that the most talented and caring, compassionate nurse that had protected our country in the far reaches of hell was caring for their precious girl. Dalton realized that he himself was being overtaken by emotion. By declaring the qualifications and reasons that Ava was not going to allow their little girl to die, his heart and mind connected just what she represented to him. "I promise," his tears preventing him from completing his statement. He excused himself to a seat he'd sat in for the previous 2 hours. Wiping his cheeks, he tilted his head to the left to see a family completely distraught, expecting the worst. Helpless, Dalton looked on as a pair of young police officers took their statements and guided them away down an artificially brightened hallway. He ordered Chinese food to be delivered to the front lobby since the hospital cafeteria and food establishments had started shutting down. The emotional investment had left him famished. He sat down at a table in the lobby to shovel a few bites of bourbon chicken and rice into his mouth before slowing to simply sifting the vegetables from the mixture. Tossing the chopsticks and napkins, he packed up the rest. He'd ordered enough to share with Ava and the staff that had been working with the reception desk. Dalton sat staring, with his hand fidgeting with the plastic loop of the bag sat beneath him at his feet. It was the moment he checked his rose gold timepiece when he caught Ava emerging from the hallway she disappeared down nearly 3 hours earlier. Her feet shuffled like a drunkard exiting the bar after a night they'd soon forget. "Oh my God, how is she? Oh, Ava." She barely maintained the strength to nod her head or clutch the strappy cork wedges by the crimson ribbon. He guided her toward the seats where the crumpled flowers and takeout were. "Let's just go," she whispered. He moved to hug her when he noticed her dress. "Love, your dress." He pulled the material at her waist, away enough to show her the blood that had gotten on the dress gifted to her just that week. With that, she buried her face in his neck, draping her limp arms around him. "Shh. It's okay. It's okay, baby. You said she's going to be just fine. The doctors have her now. Let's go." He brushed her rebellious hair back over the top of her head and kissed her brow, directing them out of the automatic sliding doors. Ava grabbed her purse from her vehicle, but Dalton insisted on driving her home. Not 2 words were spoken as they made their way to the townhome. His right hand rested on her left thigh in between intervals of paddle shifting. They had just come to a stop in the driveway, the engine still humming in the compact sports car, when she took his hand in hers and kissed his knuckles. "You look so handsome tonight, Mr. Michelson." The declaration took a great deal of energy to deliver. "And you dazzle tonight, sweet Ava." He meant every word, and she knew it. She collected the bag of mostly uneaten food along with her bag, fishing the keys from the side pocket. Dalton shut off the engine and opened his door. In the moment Ava closed her eyes, he seemingly transported to the opposite side of the car and stood, holding her door open for her. The hand extended to help her out of the low-sitting coupe. She took with her pinky as she climbed out. The bottoms of her bare feet were dark with the dirt from the parking garage. When the two made their way into the foyer, Zena was waiting to come to Ava's side. Dalton had managed to reach Huma to have her deliver Zena to their home for Ava when they got in. The look she flashed at Dalton as to communicate that she was prepared to tend to her that she was prepared to tend to her now was received by him as if she spoke words in English. He stood, watching the way they comforted one another, feeling the stiffness of his sore muscles from the week's workouts, seemingly crashing down on him, all at once with the last of the adrenaline wearing off. The Chinese food got pushed onto the second shelf next to half of a jar of strawberry preserves. Unsure what to say, Dalton remained in the doorway of the kitchen looking at Zena minister to an exhausted Ava. Clutching his car keys in his left hand, he extended both arms down toward Ava to help her to her feet, so that he could hug her and leave her be. Her eyes were red with fatigue and tears that had washed the usual sparkle from them when she looked up. Placing her little hands in his, she crossed her feet and stood to face him. She glanced toward her right hand, his left, and took the keys from him slowly. She hung them on the hook by the front door that she rarely used, and wrapped her arms around his neck. They held each other with the remainder of the strength they could muster. Her tired lips found their place on the side of his neck, his cologne sending a tiny shot of energy into her nostrils. Ava kissed just below his left ear, and his grip around her body tightened. Their mouths meshed through a kiss neither expected to have the energy for. His bottom lip held captive betwixt her teeth before being released. "So sorry about our date." Her face retreated into his collar. "Shh, no, baby, you had to. You saved that little girl's life." Dalton held her head to his chest like he was cradling a newborn. With a kiss in her hair, it smelled like heaven. He led her to the master bathroom. He ran the water to the most lukewarm temperature he could manage before switching on the shower. Just before he moved past her to make his way out of the washroom, her right hand moved backward, catching the fingers of his left hand. She placed his hand at the top button of the back of her dress. "Please?" With that, Dalton began unfastening each of the buttons of her dress. 2 buttons remained at the small of her back before the garment collapsed to her waist, exposing her bare torso. A slight shift left the blood-stained dress crumpled at their feet. Gently, Dalton held her shoulders and planted his lips on her trapezius. Feeling the chill bumps attempting to raise on the surface of her skin, he allowed the warmth of his mouth to chase them away. She was remarkably beautiful, and he knew what his body wanted. His desire to be her rock outweighed his selfishness, and with that, he kissed the side of her head. "I'm right here." He turned, just outside of the doorframe with his back to the wall. She nodded, pushing the last of her lacy underclothing to the floor, and disappeared behind the shower curtain. Resolute, Dalton sat in her bedroom, his back to the wall, face in his hands for several minutes. He nearly dozed off when he heard her sobbing. Zena must have heard it before he did, as she made her way past him onto the tile floor. "Dalton?" He sprang to his feet, inclining his ear toward her through the doorframe. "Yes, Ava." Soft sobs were the only response she could offer. Cautiously, Dalton drew back the curtain nearest the shower head. Her shaking hands reached for his face to kiss him. And with that, he stepped his bare foot over the side of the tub, joining her under the stream of water with his slacks, belt, and Burberry shirt. Their mouths met passionately as his belt and trousers came off in his hands blindly, before hanging them over the curtain rod. Ava gave her attention to the unbuttoning of the shirt that clung to his chiseled frame, as neither broke their concentration on the other's lips and warm tongues as they wrestled. Unwilling to break their connection, Dalton wrung his shirt out where they stood, and he draped it over the curtain rod next to his trousers. He reached outside of the shower for the fluffy beige towel hanging on the rack, as Ava shut the water off with pruned fingertips. Dalton draped it over her shoulders like a cape, warming her with his hands as he stood there naked. Her cheek found its place on his chest, with him drip-drying in the shower. A flash of a shiver from the cold air found its way to his spine, stirring them back to the realization of their surroundings. Her hand found a second towel in the dark, which she used to dab